Sun on my head, so it's actually, I think, even worse than over there. Hare Krishna, don't go anywhere. We're getting set up. Yeah, it's the sun. The solution is I just wear that hat. That solves the problem.
I don't know. Are you comfortable with it? Otherwise, we can move it.
So
I thought today it looks quite shielded in this spot.
no, you need a. You can shield it. You know how you shield it? You get an umbrella and you. Yeah, you get a. Somebody stands over here, and then you have a movie. Just leave the hat. I'll wear the hat. Don't go anywhere. We're getting set up. I actually was not told. I don't have it on my calendar. I was not told we're going to have class today. See, now it's fine. See, shaved heads have come with some problems. Okay, you want to figure out how to put this on? And then you plug it into that. 1 second. Today we're going to talk about all the poor men in men's bodies that make all the women in women's bodies feel bad, and why they do that, so that you will understand not to feel bad when they make you feel bad. Does that sound like a good class? Why not? How not to feel bad when people make you feel bad? That's today's class. It's a common problem. Okay, we're going to do this professionally. I'm going to put this underneath. No, it's not going to work. You're an engineer?
No, as you can see.
I've got some experience with this. This, I think, needs to go this side to hold it, maybe, in place. Otherwise, we could get a clip.
That's fine. That's
Or we could get. We could become smart or get. We're almost ready. Let's see. The sun is behind us. It's not supposed to be the best way, but that works, right? Does that work? I think it works. Yeah. Okay. And then this won't get disturbed. So the other option was to get a Zoom N1 and just plug this in, and then there's no telephone. So I just want something small and light, but for Mayapur this is working now. Okay, so this should be good. So we do this class every Monday, once a month, and when you do class once a month, it's hard to remember what you talked about in the last class, although, or it's actually hard to remember what I talked about in the class 4 months ago, whenever we started. So what I talk about today may be something that I spoke about then, but we'll see what happens. Yeah. So one of the things I thought's good for all of you, well, there's men here also, but the men can participate in this discussion. And if you have any comments or questions, especially if you have any questions, please ask them, because there's not a lot of people here now because nobody knew about the class. There'll be more people here for the next class. So it's been a common problem for many women in ISKCON that when you join ISKCON, the men treat you a lot differently than they treated you before you joined ISKCON. Do you have that experience? Yeah. So before you join ISKCON, men, they like women a lot, and so they're very friendly and maybe a little more gentlemanly, perhaps, would you say? No, not necessarily. What's the difference? They're more interested. They're more friendly. They're more open, more accepting. Yeah. Generalization. So we want to discuss why those differences are there, and then how to deal with those differences. And I think it'll help to deal with the differences by understanding why the differences are there. And there's several reasons. And I think one of the most common reasons, it's a generalization, and this applies to many aspects of life as life becomes different when you're a devotee, that it's when you're becoming Krishna conscious, number one, the culture is very new. The philosophy is very new. So you're not, how should we say, you're adjusting. Isn't it? You have that experience? You're adjusting to like you ask questions, is it all right to do this? That's an adjustment. You're making adjustments. And sometimes you're asking questions about things which you've always known how to do, but now you're a devotee and you're asking, is it okay to do it like this? So you're adjusting to the culture. Put it in. And you're not necessarily understanding everything, and then you're definitely, as a younger devotee, and still in some cases, even after being a devotee for a while, you're definitely misunderstanding some things, because some things appear to be a certain way based on what you're reading, but if you're reading within a small context, you may not completely understand it. And a lot of what we're reading is within a cultural context we're not familiar with. So we relate it to our culture, and therefore we say it should mean this. And so you have that, and then in addition, you have the general awkwardness that a man has to deal with in becoming a devotee, because in the Brahmacharini ashram there's not a lot of discussion about how bad marriage is. There's more discussion about the kind of man you like to marry. In the Brahmacharya ashram, it's not like that. They don't talk about who you're going to marry and when you're going to get married. If you spoke that way, they'd probably kick you out, wouldn't they? Or whip you. So if you ever speak that way again, you're out of here. So from hearing Bhagavatam and so many classes, the consciousness that's developed generally within a man and within the Brahmacharya ashram is that it's better not to get married, because that's what it says in the books. And it says it in a very direct way, that if you get married, this and that's going to happen. And because woman is the personification of Maya, the cause of bondage, it would be better to be aloof from that. So that's the general idea in Brahmacharya ashram. Now it may differ from place to place. Some places are very extreme that way, some are not so extreme, some are just like that for the men who want to be brahmacharis, but not for the other brahmacharis who want to get married. But you get some of that. You agree? How much you get will depend on the temple and who's the leader of the brahmacharis and so forth, and what his realization is. If there's more, some temples, the temple president was in charge of the brahmacharis and he was married. So you may get that, you may not, depending how bad his marriage is. If he had a bad marriage, you'd get that. If he had a good marriage, you wouldn't get that. But in any case, you understand that men are coming and they're being told that it's better to remain single. Woman is the cause of bondage. And they're actually experiencing that. They're experiencing the attraction. And they have become devotees to give that up. So it's like sometimes women become devotees because they realize in ISKCON you could get a good husband. And the men outside of ISKCON, they don't seem to be good husbands. I can get a man who's sense-controlled and spiritual. Men don't join thinking generally that I'm going to join ISKCON to get a good wife. They join thinking I'm going to be celibate. And most of them, or many of them, at least in my generation, when they joined, weren't thinking about getting married. They're just thinking, I'm becoming a monk and that's what I'm doing. So that's the consciousness they're coming in. And so it's almost like, in some sense, it's almost like, hey, we're monks and we're letting you come into our ashram, so, you should be happy, And so if we're not so cordial or nice, or we say some things in class that aren't so nice about you, you should be happy that we're just letting you hang out here. Although no one's going to say that, and I don't know, I can't speak for all the men, but in some sense, that's how they feel, Temple is for men, right? It's an ashram for men. So, and men are, you need men. The men are the leaders. So it's all about what's good for men. Then, now these men are coming and they're thinking, all right, I'll be a brahmachari. If not my whole life, at least for some time. And most of the men who come were not brahmacharis before they came. They were mamacharis, or ladycharis, or sexacharis. So, what's happening is they're coming into ISKCON to take up Krishna consciousness because of their experience in the material world, bad experiences, they're frustrated. They're feeling some relief. Many of them leave their girlfriends. Some of them even leave their wives. And that's happened. They've left wives and children. So there's an energy there, which is an energy of renunciation and an energy of separating from women. Now, where the problem lies is that when you have all these samskaras, because you're raised in the West and everything is very, there's no real restriction between men and women, and it's very open, and people experience from a very early age boy and girl relationships. And now these boys and girls are becoming devotees and becoming brahmacharis, which in one sense doesn't make any sense. It's not like those were the people you would pick for brahmacharis, the ones who had girlfriends from the age of 13 or 14. Not girlfriends in a good way, in a bad way. So now these men, they understand with their head what they want to do, and then they're coming into ISKCON. And they're also reading Bhagavatam, which says certain things about women that they pick up in a particular way according to their need. So here's the important point to understand. When you have to renounce, and you're not renounced, you renounce through knowledge. Jnana Yoga. And that's why the jnanis, they fall down, because knowledge means to remind yourself something's bad. That's how you renounce. I'm really attracted, so I remind myself how bad it is, because I feel it here. So how am I going to change the feeling? How am I going to deal with the feeling? I'll convince my head that it's bad. Like, that looks good to eat. And the head is saying, don't eat it. It's 9 o'clock at night, and if you eat this, you're going to dream of Frankenstein. So you keep telling yourself, yeah, I'll probably vomit if I eat it. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I really don't like this. It's really not good. You're just trying to convince yourself against what your heart feels. You understand? That's why the process of gyan, of trying to be renounced just by knowing something, it doesn't work. And so the way that's done for young men who are trying to be brahmacharis is the thing that they're attracted to, they have to speak ill about, because otherwise how will they remain detached from it? That's not a real brahmachari. But that in that stage, if they're not actually renounced, there has to be a little bit of that somewhere every now and then. And you'll see different degrees in different men. Some men, you won't see any of that. Those are the real brahmacharis, because they don't have it, they don't have the attraction, so they don't have the aversion. The ones who have more aversion generally have more attraction. So, you agree? Yeah. It's just... Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is, this ones who don't have this attraction no feelings towards him, say he normal is
They deal normal, yeah. Yeah. I mean, brahmachari, in the ideal sense, brahmachari, if he's actually brahmachari, he's not thinking about marriage, which means he's not thinking about women, which means he's not thinking about how he doesn't like women, because if you think how you don't like women, it means you're thinking about them. Right? So obviously, if he's not thinking about them, he doesn't think that I like him or I don't like him. It's just, do you like women? Do you not like women? I don't think about it. That's brahmachari. Right? So you'll see that when how men deal with women, you can kind of tell. Now, when a man is wanting to be renounced, but at heart's not renounced, sometimes you'll get a little more of the aversion. And they'll talk a little more about it, because they need to talk about it that they're basically talking to themselves. Even they might give a class about how bad it is, but they're really talking to themselves. They need to hear it, because in their heart they're not renounced, and if in your heart you're not renounced, you need to be renounced in your head. You have to have information. So I always say to men, when you're at the stage when you're starting to talk negatively about something, to be detached, it means it's almost too late now, because it's like that's an artificial remedy. It means it's like you're really there, and you don't know how to detach from it, and that's the only way you can do it, is just try to make believe you don't like it. So that's the defects of jnana, of knowledge. You need knowledge, but when you don't have something more genuine, detachment, then the knowledge it can end up causing you to be adverse. So you'll see a lot of this aversion, and what the men are trying to do is just protect their brahmachari. So you have that. That's understandable. But on top of that, you have very negative statements in Shastra. And they're not so negative for a balanced brahmachari. He won't take them. He'll just, that's just what Shastra says. It's A, B, C, D. It's matter of fact. It's not emotional. The world is like this. Maya is like this. Men are like this. Women are like this. Household life is like this. Brahmachari life is like this. It's just information. He takes it and he processes it and he says, yes, I want to be a brahmachari, or I want to get married. It's not a problem. It's the more immature, or the ones who are attached and trying to be renounced. When they take that information feeds them, because that's where they get their life, their blood, their energy, from that kind of negative talk. Hare Krishna. You know what I mean? It's like, or they just don't understand. It's just they're not mature enough, and it just whatever they're feeling in terms of aversion, those shlokas are confirming. See, right here it says, never trust a woman, her heart's like a razor, they're less intelligent, all these things. And those are the things that he just takes them at face value. He doesn't really understand what it means. And he finds it useful for his renunciation. So then, understanding that a man is in that situation, still effulgence on my head. Understanding that a man is in that situation, and if he treats you in a negative way, then you can be understanding, not take it personally. Now, does that make sense? Yeah, that's just he's now the difference, the male-female difference. If you join ISKCON, and in the women's ashram, it's just accepted that marriage is good. It's the best place for a woman. It's natural function to have children. Nobody's really preaching against it, other than occasionally someone, very rarely, will preach against that. At least now in 2017, I don't think that's really being preached to young girls generally, unless there's some fanatic, crazy brahmachari in charge of a temple who doesn't understand. But within the women's ashram, it's kind of rare. So the women they have the attraction, but not so much the aversion, because they're not trying to avoid it generally. So they're in a different world than the men. So then on top of that, you have a movement which is dominated by men. So then there can be some aversion by some men to women. Now, you have men who are completely celibate and controlled, who have no sexual aversion or attraction to women. They just don't like women managing. So they have an aversion, not relationally, but generically, that women shouldn't just manage. So then you're going to run into people like that. And you may be qualified to do something in a department and some other man is doing it and he's not doing it well, and you can't tell him anything, and you get frustrated. So why won't they listen? I actually have a master's degree in this, and he's a high school dropout. I actually know how to do this, but he won't listen to me, and this is not going to work, and if you do it this way, in a year or two, it's going to fall apart. I know that. I study this. You may run into situations like that, and no one will listen to you. So you have to understand that for various reasons, that's the way things are. It's that way in the material world to some degree, depending on the country. And so it's not that we're isolated from the culture we live in. It was like that way when I joined. Men were doing things. And so what happens is when women come from outside into this environment, it's a bit of a shock because they're not used to it, because men are treating them differently and opportunities are not the same. Obviously there are problems for women in the material world also. I'm not saying there aren't, but there will probably, for some women in ISKCON, it'll be a little extreme and difficult. Difficult when you're qualified, and the other thing is difficult when you're mistreated and not appreciated. So now I think we can speak in general, because this also happens to men, because sometimes men are not appreciated, they're not treated well. And they may be more qualified to do something, and they're not allowed to do it. So then we can talk in general how to deal with this kind of situation, because I think it's important when you understand this, you can try to work to change it, but at the same time you have to accept that right now this is how it is, and you have to deal with that. So that's important, because sometimes it's difficult to accept, isn't it? And so when you don't accept, how then can you make a solution to the problem? I think one of the things I've learned, and people ask me, after Prabhupada left, wasn't it difficult? Yeah, it was very difficult. And so people ask, how was it that you could stay in ISKCON even though it's difficult? Well, you have to be very, very focused on your devotional service. Like people would say, why didn't you just leave? It must have been so hard. Yeah, it was hard. And many of our leaders were leaving, breaking principles. And you're in a temple, you're managing, and it's all their disciples, and then they leave, and their disciples they're just heartbroken and crushed. And then you're having to deal with that. That is difficult. Like, how could you deal with that? Why didn't you leave? And I think there's two things, and I think it applies to the women's issue. One is you have your service, and you have your bhakti, so you can't give up your bhakti because of problems that are around you. You have to isolate your own bhakti. I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what you're doing. I don't like the way I'm treated by this one, and this one's stabbing me in the back, and this leader just fell, and he criticized me for 20 years, and then he fell down, and I had to keep my mouth shut. And I don't like any of that. But within all of that, I have to save my own devotional service. I have to find a place for myself, right?
Yamuna described exactly this situation in her book.
Yeah.
And it was just like exactly the situation.
Yeah.
She mastered it exemplary.
Yeah, yeah, because two wrongs don't make a right. So Yeah, if I let everything around me upset me, then it's, in a sense I'm as bad as the people that are upsetting me. Or I let them upset me. What and that's very easy to do because we're all pulled in by that. Well, if he failed, why should I try? Or if I'm being mistreated, why should I stick around? Why should I even try? It's not right. It's not fair. Right? So, number one, we have our devotional service, and we have to do that. We have to save ourselves. We have to be Krishna conscious in any situation. So we can't let situations deter us from our purpose. And then the second thing is we have service. So, at least my thought was, if the situation is difficult and I give up my service, or at least I don't find some service, then if Prabhupada asked me, why did you give up your service, what would I tell him? And would my reason be valuable enough to tell him? Like, in other words, if you're in a difficult situation and you want to give up, and then you think, okay, if I'm going to give up based on this reason, how would I feel sitting in front of Prabhupada telling him this is why I gave up? So in the case, in the discussion we're having now, it would be, well, Srila Prabhupada, the men don't treat the women well, so I stopped chanting my rounds. But what do you think Prabhupada would say? Something like, don't let them bother you, don't pay attention to them. Do your service, don't be affected by it. You see in situations like this that a lot of times when these things happened, Prabhupada didn't say something like, yes, I know the men are mistreating you, I know this is bad. He didn't really take that route, and it's not that he didn't know that, and not that he didn't understand that. He took more of the route of how you're going to respond to it. And if they're doing something wrong and then you get affected by it, then that's wrong also. In other words, I see you doing something wrong, and so now I'm focused on what you're doing is wrong, and that's just as wrong as what you did. You understand? It's like your fault is now infecting me, so I go to my spiritual master and say, well, Gopinath did this, and that's why I'm doing that. And then I tell him that's my reason. And then he says, well, Gopinath's fault has now become your fault because you allowed yourself to get affected by what he did. And I think anyone who stayed in ISKCON, at least through those years of the 80s, which were really difficult years, if you asked them, how did you stay, that's the answer they'd give you. They'd say, I didn't focus on those things. I had to, it's like you have to carve out your space wherever it is, whatever it is. Okay, there's men here, and they treat women this way. There's management here, it's all male-dominated. There's this, whatever it is, if that were the case, for the sake of discussion, you'd have to find some space in there where you can do your service and not allow yourself to be affected by that. Because if you are affected by it, what's going to happen to you? What are you going to do? It's going to affect your service. And, I'm sure you must know some devotees who've left ISKCON because of these things. It's like, I don't want to be in a movement that treats people this way. You know anybody like that? There's a lot of them out there. It's like they look at the integrity or the social values and they see hypocrisy, contradiction. And it is difficult. I don't want to be in a society like that. And at the same time, Prabhupada's saying, please stay in the society, make it better. So in order to stay in, you have to find some spot in the midst of that storm where you create your own shelter. So that person can say this, that person could do that. Here's my space. I'll be okay. And you you have to be able to evaluate what you can expect from people. So you know things are a certain way. What can I expect from this person? What can I expect from this committee? What can I expect from this management? And once you kind of know what to expect, then when they do it, it doesn't really bother you anymore because you already expected that. And you're kind of prepared for it. Right? Well, I knew that's what they were going to do or going to say, but it doesn't really bother me because I know that's how they operate. So I work around it in my own way. Otherwise, you go crazy. Yes. I have a question. How can we find balance in these situations? Women accepting marriage as good and the best place for them, and men seeing marriage as a total opposite. How can we find balance? Well, number one, if you're going to get married, don't marry a man who's out of balance. Because if you marry a man who thinks marriage is the worst thing that ever happened to the human species, then you're not going to have a happy marriage. And if you marry a man who's getting married because he thinks, well, I couldn't make it as a brahmachari, and this is what you do when you fail as a brahmachari, you get married, then it's a very negative way to enter marriage. So at least you could try to avoid such a person, or if you're somehow are attracted to such a person, convince him that something's wrong. I think we're all a little bit out of balance. You know, like, okay, the men are out of balance in aversion, then the women get out of balance because it's so hard to get men. You know, they're used to men running all over them. Then they become a devotee, the men won't even talk to them. And then they want to get married, and it's like, you know, they think, well, this man would make a nice husband, and somebody asks them, are you interested in marrying? And they say, no, I'm brahmachari, I'm happy, I'm fine, you know. And all the good ones are, no, I'm brahmachari, I'm happy, I'm fine. And so what happens for you as a woman is, as the men are on the adverse side, your attraction is getting stronger, because as you get older, you start to worry. Well, I'm getting older and there's not that many men around, so it's kind of like you're both on opposite ends of the pole, right? And then the problem is when that man finally decides to get married after resisting for so many years, he's not actually like wildly thinking about getting married. It's more like, well, you know, I just think that, you know, it's like a slow, thought-out decision. You know, for so many years I thought I wouldn't do it. Then I started thinking about it. Then I talked to my guru. Then I talked to my other god brothers, and I prayed to Krishna. It's like, for a woman, it's just like, yeah, just do it. For a man, it's like, you know, it can be a big thing, right? So she's running into it, and he's like, dun, 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 you know. So that's where the imbalance is on both sides. And then so you get in the marriage, you finally get married, and like the day after you're married, you're like out there at the real estate office, you know, and in the morning, and the furniture store in the afternoon, and the man's like, what are you doing? So we're married, you know, we need a house. And in the evening at the car dealer, right? You're like ready, you know, where's the house, the furniture, and the whole thing. And the man is like, wait a minute, you know, I just thought we were going to like travel in a van and preach. Isn't it? Yes, a little bit like that. You know, women are ready, men are ready when they're younger, and so when they get married, they're ready. And the man, he's entered it more like, if he's coming from the brahmachari ashram, it's kind of like, well, this is the last resort, and then when he gets into the ashram, he takes it real slow. It's almost like there's no transition. He just moves into it. You know, kind of like he didn't change ashram. he's there at Mangalartik every day, he's still out on book distribution, and the woman's say, well, like, how are you going to make enough money to support us? And just distribute Prabhupada's books, we don't need much, we'll just build a tree house, and it only costs $1,000, no mortgage, we'll ride bicycles. And the woman's like, I don't think so. So that's something to consider. And it's just an awkwardness. And it's a reality we're dealing with. And it's not right, but it just is. My personal experience is that the more we can accept the situation, even if it's wrong, the easier it is to deal with. In other words, okay, so I'm in ISKCON, and many of the men think that way. And some of the best men are the ones who don't want to get married. Now here's another paradox. This is interesting. That, like, Andy, you want to marry a man who's a good devotee. But there's a problem with good devotee husbands. You want to know the problem with good devotee husbands? There is a problem. Sometimes good devotees are very renounced. Sometimes good devotees are a little too renounced for their husbands, for their wives, I mean. They're not that interested in material life. So it's something we just have to accept, that this is how it is, and it's not ideal. You want to meet a guy and you can't just really get to know him. It's like, at least in Mayapur, you can't hang out with another guy unless you're engaged. But then you'd think, why would I get engaged to someone if I can't hang out with them, right? It's just the way it is. And it's like, we have to accept these things and deal with it as it is, even though it's not right. The point, or not ideal, the point I'm making is that when you don't accept these things, then you focus on what's wrong. And that when you focus on what's wrong, it builds up inside of you and it becomes a disturbance. And it agitates your mind. Now, I'm not saying all men are like this, but definitely some are. You agree? Some are? And it's all a survival mechanism. And it's also based on what the man thinks is correct and the best choice. So we have some more questions. Yeah. Well, the answer to your question actually is education, that everyone should be educated. One of the problems is if somebody has a certain nature and they're not aware of it, or they deny it, or they pretend they don't, then they can't act properly. We've seen this. There's a problem. It's a very interesting problem, where a married man leaves his wife on the plea of renunciation. I just want to, give up and preach. And he finds household life is an entanglement. And so he renounces, maybe even takes sannyas. And then sometime later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, you see he's wearing white. He left his wife, he had everything, and now he's wearing white again. So that's an example of someone not understanding their nature, and then also valuing things like renunciation to such a degree that they can't, it's like hard for them to accept that they wouldn't be renounced, to accept their nature. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is valued, and then to realize or to confront that I don't have that, is really hard. So you'd rather kind of feel that you have it. So then, if somebody's not real, then they'll cause problems for other people. But in any case, at least in my analysis is that the cultural transition of becoming a devotee is so big and so huge, and there's so much that young devotees don't understand, and they're just trying to find their ground and balance, and so they may act in ways which are immature. And unless they have senior guidance that's helping them maturely deal with these situations, many men will act immaturely, many women will act immaturely. And it's just the way it is. And hopefully it will get better. The other night we were speaking to one lady, and I think she's 27, and she said her temple president is very, he believes in renunciation. So he was telling her she should never marry because it's an entanglement. Only if you have to, as a last resort. And there have been, this was kind of how we were raised as devotees. We preached this way. And I've seen this kind of preaching have create problems for people who, we had young women who would put on white at the age of like 24. Many of them. And then, when they're 28, 29, and they realize they can't do it, it's very awkward. Puts them in a difficult position. They feel guilty. And so preaching to them to do that was a great disservice. So if we accept our nature and deal with it, everything's good. No matter what the Bhagavatam says, you are who you are, and you have to deal with it. Bhagavatam says, this is first class. Are you first class? Now, there's another thing that's happening, which I feel is very sad. And it's part of this kind of thinking that many devotees have written me and said that they've tried to be single, but they can't do it. Now, you think that's something wrong with that? I try to be single, I can't do it. And then they say, I'm in Maya, I feel guilty, and almost like there's something wrong with me. That's basically the connotation. I'm in Maya, there's something wrong with me, I feel guilty. I say, why? Because I want to get married. So I find that sad, that people have been trained to think that wanting to get married is so bad. And they feel so guilty. What do you think? I must be in total Maya. Why? I have this desire to get married and have children. Oh yeah, Prabhu. You are in total Maya. The way Prabhupada dealt with these things. It was it was like for Prabhupada, it wasn't a big thing. And for us, it's like, all these things become like big things. No, don't do that, it's the worst thing. You're going to ruin your life. And Prabhupada was like, yeah, whatever you like. For most men, if he saw someone was at sannyas quality, he would say, better you stay brahmachari. I mean, he would tell brahmacharis, better you stay brahmachari. But if they wanted to get married, it was like, it wasn't like, I got to give class about this tomorrow, and the Prabhupada's on his Vyasa-san, he's really heavy, and he gives a heavy class about brahmachari life and celibacy and all the defects in marriage. It was never like that. That's what it was like with us. It'd be like an emergency Bhagavatam class. Okay, now, here's another thing I've seen. Maybe you've seen this also. The Brahmachari ashram. You have really good Brahmachari ashram. They're doing a lot of service. They're very enthusiastic. And they're very austere. And the reason is because they have a leader who's very enthusiastic and very austere. And so they're trying to keep up with the leader and do the austerities that he's doing. And he's been a Brahmachari for 20 years. And they all look up to that and say, here's like an ideal for us, right? You've seen ashrams like that? Like really, it's simple. They're men, they're happy, their lives are simple, and they're enthusiastic. And then something happens. Dreadful. How do you say? The unthinkable. The unthinkable happens. What happens? The brahmachari, head brahmachari, gets married. Dun, dun, dun. It's like the unthinkable happens, right? Have you seen that? And then the whole brahmachari ashram in the next week turns white. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon? So what do we learn from that? We learn that we create a situation where we're not allowing people to be natural, and we're making people feel bad for being who they are. And then they enter Grihastha ashram feeling bad that they had to do this because this was so bad. And that's destructive. It's very, very bad. And Prabhupada never made anybody feel that way. So that was a strange answer to your question. I don't even know if I answered your question. But, I don't know if there is an answer to your question other than brahmachari should be more well educated. Or you could save this class and the last class we gave on this topic, I think it would be very good for men to hear. Because once you accept what you are and where you're at, then all your actions are normal. You know the saying, WCY, what you see, IUG. You know that? What you see is what you get. It's an acronym. What you see is what you get. So, Prabhupada defined pretension as what you see is not what you get. What you see on the outside is somebody very great, but on the inside you don't get anybody great. What you see is not what you get somebody else. That's called duplicity. The inside, you're not Krishna conscious. The outside, you look Krishna conscious. So, this kind of need to look Krishna conscious, it's not healthy. But then sometimes what even happens in this artificial environment, a woman is attracted to a man who is, Mr. Number One Brahmachari because that was the peer pressure. But actually he really wasn't. He was just playing along with it. And, they wouldn't let him cultivate it. So, anyway, that's a thought. So we have another question. Hasn't Srila Prabhupada asked us not to leave ISKCON a good enough reason? Leela Amrita is filled with the difficulties he faced. Just to get... it's the main reason people stay. For sure. But I was also talking about the fact that if you've decided you're going to stay in ISKCON, then how do you actually do that? When around you find things which are unjust or unfair, you find prejudice or discrimination. How do you do that? By accepting the reality of human nature, that these people are trying to be devotees, but we're not perfect, and this is how we act. Accepting the culture you're in. You're in India, it's a certain way. You go to Russia another way, America another way. Being more accepting of the culture. And just the actual situation that you're in. All the factors that you can control or can't control. I'll tell you a story. This is called Sitting on the Fence in Los Angeles. From around 1983 to 1986, in Los Angeles, and I'm sure in many places around the world, maybe everywhere, we did a lot of sitting on the fence. And sitting on the fence is an expression, but I'm not referring to that. Sitting on the fence means you could go this way or that way. That's not what I mean. Well, no, it was sitting on the wall. Across from the LA Temple, there were gardens in front of the apartments, and there were walls, and you could sit on the wall. So the things were so bad in those days, we would spend a lot of time sitting on the wall talking about how bad it was. And part of the reason that we were talking about how bad it was is because nobody was doing anything about it, and nobody knew how to do anything about it because the people in power controlled everything, and you couldn't tell them. So all you could do was sit on the wall and talk to all your friends about how bad it is. And after about 3 years of sitting on the wall and talking, and wasting a lot of time talking, we had a realization that actually we can't do anything. And that Krishna is the only one who could do anything. And by the time we finally had that realization, very shortly after, Krishna did something. And Krishna removed the persons who were creating the problems. And when it happened, it was confirmation of our realization that sometimes you can't do anything. It's an injustice. This is wrong. Everybody knows it's wrong. But due to the politics or the social situation, you can't change it. Only Krishna can change it, and Krishna did change it. So that was a good lesson. Some things you may never change. Only Krishna will change if he wants to. Now, those of you who are going to have the biggest problem with situations like this are the ones for whom justice is extremely important. That you really get upset when things are not done properly, when things are not right, when people are lied to, people are treated unfairly. If that's your nature, it's not bad, but in situations where things don't go that way, it can really, really upset you. It can actually throw you out of ISKCON by your own volition if you're not careful. Because you will find sometimes things aren't perfect. And so to be a little more accepting will be your saving grace, that this is just how it is. And once you accept how it is, you can deal with it. And if you don't accept how it is, how will you deal with it? So anyway, that's what we did. We accepted, this is how it is, we can't change it, and if it's going to change, Krishna will change it, and he did. And as you said, Jamuna, the instruction that Prabhupada gave all his disciples was, at least you act the way you want other people to act. So one thing is you can complain about how they're acting. The other thing is just act how you would like them to act. And they'll learn from you. Does that make sense? Okay, we have a brahmachari from ISKCON who got married was celibate within his marriage for long periods of time, but he had intercourse with his co-workers and English classmate. Isn't that hypocrisy? Hare Krishna. There's a story like that. They told Prabhupada that some man was going to see a prostitute. And Prabhupada's first question was, isn't he married? Interesting, isn't it? That's what Prabhupada said. Why is he going to prostitute? Isn't he married? Well, what does that mean? So, Prabhupada said that sometimes that, you can't allow that to happen. So it is hypocrisy. I think it's a question of accepting the understanding what goes on in the ashram. There's a very nice article on Dandavats. If you'd like to read, I think you'd like it. I don't know the title, but I can tell you the topic, and I know who wrote it. It was written by Matsyavatar, and there's the picture that goes with the article is a picture of a family. And it's a discussion on illicit sex. What is illicit sex? How it's applied in the Grihastha ashram. So this kind of topic was discussed, and I think I believe it's the best thing I ever read on the topic on defining illicit sex. You should read it. You'll like it. Okay. Does anyone here have any questions? See, one of the things that in Prabhupada's answer to this situation, he's saying, well, wasn't he married? Oh my God, I forgot to bring the book I was going to read today. Could you call Janava?
I think my friend has it here. I just can't.
That's called
This third book of Shiva Rama.
Chintamani, Bhakti, Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani.
This is the third book of Shiva Rama.
Yeah. Oh yeah, if you have it, yeah.
Oh, she's sleeping.
Who is it?
I don't know.
What?
She's just living here, but she lives in here. I don't have it.
Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani. Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani. I think Janava's like, I don't know when she's coming. Maybe, could you give her? No, she comes for something else. You can call her and ask her if she's coming. I can talk from it. I'd like to read from it. Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani. Shuddha Bhakti. So, if anybody worked with Prabhupada, then they knew that he was practical. So he understood struggles and difficulties people had. And some of us became more fanatical than Prabhupada. So that's something to remember. Some of us become more liberal than Prabhupada, more conservative than Prabhupada, more fanatical than Prabhupada. And so you don't ever want to be, you don't ever want to be a way that Prabhupada wasn't. That's very important. So we have to pay close attention to how Prabhupada dealt with these things. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, we'll end this class and then we'll start the other class. Is that all right? Okay, this class has officially ended. I will exit from this class and I will start another class. We're talking about the stage of Asakti, okay? Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.